watching Divorce Shield Live, the weekly show for men who are thinking about going through or recovering from divorce. I'm your host, John Knocklinger. I'm a recovering divorce attorney and the founder of Divorce Shield, a company exclusively devoted to helping men plan for and navigate divorce. I'm also the founder of the Men's Divorce Network. It is an online community for men who are going through the divorce process, who want a place where they can go and talk to other guys going through exactly what they're going through. You can find out more and join for free at mensdivorcenetwork.com. So today we have another guy with a real divorce story. He is Paul from St. Paul. And just so you guys all know, because you're about to see in a second, that's not his name. It's not exactly where he's from, because he is the Divorced Dad Anonymous. And he's going to explain a little bit why he's anonymous, both on this podcast and also out in the world, as we go through today's discussion. He's a divorced dad who has been working with other dads to push through their divorce and become better versions of themselves for the sake of their children, a goal that we do share at Divorce Shield. He also had some challenges along the way after he left his wife, and we're going to talk through all of those with him today. You can find out more about him on Instagram at Divorced Dads Anonymous. And I think that he's got big plans for helping men throughout this whole process. Thanks for being here today, Paul.
Excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure. I love hearing these stories from men, particularly fathers who have been through divorce, not only to learn what happened to you and what advice you have for people, but also so that guys can just see that you can get through this process and it can be okay. Because that's really where the fear starts. So, Paul, let's start back. When were you married?
Yeah, so I was married in 2014.
How long did the marriage last?
It lasted until 2020, about a month before COVID came and shut down all of the U.S. and the rest of the world.
Okay, so about 6 years. Do you have any children?
Yes, I've got 2 children, a 5-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter.
Is that how old they are right now?
Correct. Yep.
All right, so they were
4 and 3.
Oh,
4 and 2.
that's a rough age for going through a divorce, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, so I teased a little bit about this in the opening, but obviously you're wearing some shades, you got a mask on, and it's a little dark in the background. So why don't you explain a little bit to us why you keep yourself anonymous when you're having these kinds of conversations?
Absolutely. Well, for me, this platform, Divorced Dads Anonymous, it isn't about me. It's about fathers. It's about guys that are going through divorce. And I believe that as men, we have an opportunity to be maybe more real, more authentic than we normally would be. And as I was sharing with you, John, I want to tell my story authentically, and I don't necessarily want my ex-wife to necessarily hear about it. I'm not going to ever use her name on this platform. I don't necessarily want my children to find this, when they're in middle school or high school, and hear some of the really, really challenging things that we went through, and maybe have a tainted view of their mom or our relationship. And so I believe that if we can provide a platform where we can share, be our true authentic selves in terms of what we've experienced and what we've gone through in a way that is anonymous, we're going to get better stories. We're going to get more real with each other. And ultimately, we're going to have better outcomes. And like I shared before, the reason I do this is because I want to be the best dad I can for my kids. And I believe that almost every dad wants to be the best they can for their kids. And it starts with just taking away that fear of basically being outed, because I made mistakes along the way as well as other folks. And so that's why I keep myself, again, it's not about me. It's about the other dads as well. So it's about being honest with us, without fear of getting too much out, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. I've spoken to a lot of men who feel the same way that you do, that they want to get their story out there, but they have any number of fears. Some are similar to yours. Some just are, embarrassed, or they're just uncomfortable being, public with their private lives. And there's others who have no trouble whatsoever just saying, whatever, even with their real names and faces. But you're right. There has to be a place for everybody to share their story, and, all different comfort levels. So I think it's really great what you're doing. So you were married for about 6 years. What sort of led to the downfall of your marriage?
Yeah. So I was with my ex-wife. We started dating when we were about 20 years old. We're basically the same age. And we, graduated college together, moved in together, and I think it was about 7 years before we actually got married. And so fast forward, a couple kids come, and there was always, definitely like a power imbalance in my relationship. My ex-wife has a good corporate job, is very persuasive, very much, for a time, it felt like she wore the pants in the relationship. And then a shift started to change. My son was 2 years old, had a second birthday party. I woke up the next day just completely hungover. I got chewed out in front of my family. And I said, all right, I think I've got a drinking problem. I'm going to stop. And I stopped drinking. And over the next couple of years, life started to change a bit. I started going one way in terms of trying to make better, healthier life choices. And, she kind of kept going the way that our relationship had been about, which was a lot of like going out and partying. And she decided that she wanted to date other people while we were still married. And, being a very open person, like, okay, I don't really have much of a foundation, or I'm not really good at boundary setting. Like, I've always been told, like, oh, as a husband, you've got to be very accommodating. And maybe this is some new age thing that people are doing. And so bluntly, we tried that for a little bit. And we always had a rule: if anybody wanted to stop doing it, we would stop. And it started getting out of control. And I kind of threw my hands up and said, look, I am not comfortable with this. I don't want to do this anymore. And she's like, I want to keep dating. And I said, well, that's not going to work, And so I just said, here's the deal. I'm out. If you want to live that kind of a lifestyle, that's your choice. But that's not for me. And so I moved out.
Wow, Paul, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So let's go back to, so you were struggling with a drinking issue while this was all going on. Did your wife, ex-wife, did she have a similar problem? I know you said you went out and you were partying a little too much, but was she also having that kind of issue?
Yes. Yep. And so, as one of my friends in a certain 12-step program I belong to kind of explained to me, oftentimes when you've got a relationship founded on drinking and partying and stuff like that, oftentimes if one person stops, the other person in a relationship will either slow down or start making some of those type life choices that you are, or oftentimes they kind of go a little bit more intensely. And that was definitely my situation. So we had 2 young children, and it was like happy hours during the week for her and then partying on the weekends, and I was staying at home with the kids.
And this all came to a head after your son's birthday party. I mean, what had things happened before that kind of preceded moving towards that day where you made this decision?
Yeah. So growing up, and drinking, I always knew that something wasn't quite right. And I tried stopping before. And even on that particular day, that was in 2018, I stopped cold turkey for a couple months, just doing things on my own. And then I'd say, well, I can go on vacation and drink because I'm not around the kids. And I would drink with her on vacation, feel the same way, the next morning. But then I would come home and just kind of, not drink, white knuckle, if they call it. And so I always knew that I had an issue, and I knew that I should probably stop, but I just wasn't ready to stop. And then it was basically when I made that choice that I was done with this marriage. I called a friend of mine about something completely separate. I didn't even know that he was sober or part of anything. And he just said, look, this is a really, really, really big life change. If there were ever a time in your life where you were going to go off the deep end and do something stupid, you've kind of got an excuse to do that. But do you really want to do that? And I was like, absolutely not. I've got to navigate this. I got a lot of things to figure out, right? As John, as you know, when you're just, when you've made the decision to make a divorce, there's a lot of decisions that need to happen. And I wanted to make sure I could make those decisions with a clear mind, move forward with a clear mind. And so that's when I, joined a 12-step recovery program and really went all in on it.
And what was your ex-wife's reaction whenever you joined that program?
So I was out of the house at that point in time. And so it was basically, we have a 5-5-2-2 schedule. So Monday and Tuesday nights, I don't have the kids. Monday nights, I was going to my weekly meetings. Tuesday night, I joined this divorce group through a church, like a local church. Tuesday, I was doing therapy. It was basically every day I didn't have the kids, I was doing something for my mental health, because I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know what happens when I drink and do drugs or whatever, but I don't want that. So how can I, surround myself with good people? And that, it was through that experience that I learned a couple things. One, you've got to admit that there's an issue. So there was an issue with my marriage. I admitted that, that was not working. And I kind of just had to realize there's things in my control and there's things outside of my control. So focus on the things I can control and just let go of the other stuff. And as talking with men all the time, there are so many things that we wish we had control over that we just gotta don't look at her Facebook. Don't look at this, that, or the other. Just keep that out of your mind because there's nothing you can do to change that. And so that was a big part of it. And then for me, I went through this 12-step program and I laid out everything I had a resentment about, everything I felt shame about. I laid out all of my character defects, and then I went and shared that with somebody, and then made a plan to take care of those. And I just think for me, going through that with the alcohol stuff while going through this divorce, it really made me realize, even if I wasn't doing this for drinking, just going through that process of admitting, what you're afraid of, what you're ashamed about, and talking with people, you realize that most of the stuff isn't as big as we make it out to be, and sometimes just saying it to another human being, you realize I've been letting that little thing eat me up for years, maybe a decade or longer. It just totally changed my perspective on a lot of things, So that was that was my experience. This is the first 90 days after I, moved out of the house.
That's a great perspective. Now, your ex-wife was also drinking a lot. Are you concerned at all that she's not addressing this and she's got the children as much of the time as she does?
So absolutely. It's something that came up. And basically what a mediator told me was, and I respect what she said, was that, you know, she's allowed to drink. There's no law against her drinking. She's, you know, as long as she's not driving with the kids, and as long as she's not hitting the kids or, you know, causing some sort of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse that's documentable, there's really nothing I can do. And John, it took me, I mean, 6, 9, 12 months to really just let that go, because I do worry about that. And there were some specific instances that came up. And again, since this is an anonymous platform, I'm going to share this. But there was one day when she was 3 at the time, came with bruises on her butt and her back. And, you know, I texted her mom and said, "Hey, what happened to our daughter?" She says that you spanked her. She got these bruises on her. And her response, well, it was, you know, I spanked her, but I would never hit her hard enough to bruise her. And then I called her on the phone and I said, "Hey, let's talk about this. You know, I don't hit the kids. You're legally, technically, I guess, allowed to spank to some degree. I don't fully understand what the rules are here where I live, but I just said, what is it like? What is the action that it takes for it to elevate to that level where the kids get spanked? Because I want to, at my house, work on those behaviors so that you don't see those types of behaviors at your house." And she got angry. She said, "I'm allowed to parent whatever style I want to parent," and she hung up the phone on me. And then she emailed me and CC'd her attorney and said that she had never spanked the kids. She doesn't spank the kids. She wouldn't do that. And then wrote, "And by the way, I know that you hit the kids." So just contradicted what she just said via text message. So my response with that was I contacted our local sheriff's department, had the conversation with them. They directed me to our CPS. CPS came out, did their investigation, and, you know, nothing really came out of it. But I think for me, it was, for the first time, really setting boundaries. We're like, look, you know, this isn't gonna happen. This isn't gonna be allowed. You're not allowed to do this. And, you know, my ex-wife is a person that has been told yes by many, many, many people, her parents, myself, etc. And so for the first time we started dating in 08 to 2020, 12 and a half years, that she started getting boundaries from me. And so I think that, you know, it's been an adjustment thing. So I think that the kids don't really talk about her drinking as much as they used to. I know it still happens, but it's one of those things where, like, if it elevates to a level where I see something, I hear something that involves danger with my kids, then I'm going to elevate that issue. But other than that, I need to just step back and let her live her life.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what that mediator said to you, I don't think is completely incorrect. But, you know, I've seen what happens, though, when children are around someone that has a substance abuse problem, even if they're not drinking around, you know, the kids or driving with the kids while they're drunk, you know, because it still comes out in other forms.
Right.
I was just thinking of, most people that listen to this podcast know that I also am an attorney in New Jersey, and I'm just thinking of this case recently where I divorced this guy 10 years ago. His kids were about the same age as yours when you got divorced, and the exact same situation. They both were heavy drinkers. He actually got sober. She didn't. But back then, there was a lot of fear, like, should I really fight for this? You know, are people going to listen? And then what it has ended up happening, fast forward 10 years, is one of the kids has his own substance abuse problems. You know, he's using drugs. And the other 2 kids are constantly texting dad now, because they're both teenagers, saying, you know, mom's passed out drunk again. So what has ended up happening is these kids have been subjected to so much. And I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen to your family, but
Sure.
you know, it's really, I think your antennas are up. you're focusing in, your kids are going to get a little bit older. And if she is becoming a problem, they're not going to tolerate it. And I think that's when, all this ends up coming to a head a lot of times, because you're right. I mean, you have, your kids probably were too young to really maybe process the big change in you from where you were to where you are now. I'm sure everyone else around you sees it, right? But it really is hard. It's so difficult when there's any kind of substance abuse problem, because what that mediator said to you is exactly what judges will say, what everyone will say, which is, well, as long as she's not doing it around the kids, she can do whatever she wants to do, which I kind of think is kind of nonsense. But be that as it may, so you got better. I want to go back to the open relationship that she wanted.
Yep.
How did that start? Did she just come to you one day and say, Paul, I want to go out and, screw other guys? Like, how did that come up in conversation?
Yeah. So again, hindsight's 2020, right, John? So my personality is, I try to be very accommodating. I try to, I'm going to just say it, I kind of believed a lot of you see, like, in a lot of pop culture, like, well, as long as you just do whatever she wants, she'll be happy and you'll get, whatever, you need or whatever. And I bought into that. And so, in this relationship, it was, I did my best to put myself out there and do what, basically do what she wanted, because I believe that if I made her happy, then she'd be able to make me happy. And I'll tell you, it's far from the truth. So any guys that are listening out there that think that, well, as long as I just make her happy, I'll be happy, or the happy wife equals happy life. I don't believe that anymore, but I did. And I was a big believer in that. And so, she was out of town for work. And our sex life or intimacy at that point in time in our lives was pretty sporadic. It wasn't very good. But I gave her the benefit of the doubt. She just had children. She works this, corporate job, a lot of stress. And, I took some of the blame. Maybe I'm not doing something right, And so, kind of out of the blue, one night, it was like the night before she was coming home, she started like texting me like pictures of herself, like in her underwear and stuff like that, sexting me or whatever. And she said, hey, something to the effect of, I know that we started dating when we were 20 and, we didn't really get to try a lot of things before we got married, etc. Maybe we should consider trying an open relationship. And like, I still remember the feeling. It was just like, whoa, like this is kind of crazy. And then followed by like, well, maybe, I'll finally get to, sleep with like a good looking blonde lady. I've never done that, like just very like me focused. And I was like, okay, like anything, I'm open, but like, let's talk about this when you get home. And she got home, that was Thursday night. She got home Friday, and Friday, we kind of like talked about it and like, yeah, there would be rules. And in my mind, it's like all very theoretical. Like it was like an idea that might happen someday. Well, the next day we went out with friends and I was driving because I wasn't drinking. And just to kind of relate back to like, so I stopped drinking before I stopped like smoking pot. So I didn't drink, but I was still doing other stuff. So I was always like, for a year or two, I was the driver before I went like full on sober. And so I was the driver because, I wasn't drinking, and everybody got all wasted. And she came to me and she said, I've got a date for next Tuesday. And I was just like, I still remember, like, we're out with these people. I don't want to make a big scene, but just that gut punch, like, holy smokes. Like, this was like an idea that I thought we were still considering. And you've already like a day and a half later, 2 days later, you've got plans with somebody. And so that's how it started. And I just, oh man, that was just one of the most uncomfortable situations. Um,
So how long did this go on before the divorce came up?
yeah, so it happened for like a couple months, and then she basically like went out. We were with some friends in a Northwoods bar, like where everybody knows everybody, and she got drunk. I was at the campsite watching the kids, and she started making out with some guy, and like everybody's like, "Dude, you're married. What are you supposed to? What are you doing?" And that kind of put the kibosh on it. I think she was really embarrassed. Like a bunch of people that she knew called her out on it, and then and then we moved. So there was just like a lot of moving parts going on. It was like it felt, again, hindsight 2020. She's upset, so let's try an open marriage. Well, that's not going to work. Well, let's get a new house. Well, that's not going to work. And then it was like we'd moved, we'd settled, we started going to couples therapy. Never brought that up, by the way. It was a nice old Christian lady who probably would have kicked us out of the room right at that point in time. And then it got suggested again in the fall. And so it was like another month or two. And then all of a sudden she was gone, John, like one night a week, 2 nights a week, 3 nights a week. It was like she basically started dating a guy, and like from my perspective, it was about one thing, just like a physical experience. But for her, what I learned is, like, for lack of better terms, she got an off ramp, right? Like monkey branched me, or whatever you want to say for the term, right? And so I just gave her an ultimatum, like, either you keep hanging out with this guy and I'm out, or we try to fix this. And she's like, I'm not going to stop hanging out with this guy. I'm like, okay, then that's my sign.
So Paul, I understand that's what the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, but how were you feeling yourself? I mean, you could not have been feeling very good knowing she was out. Even the fact that she wanted to be going out doing all of these things with God knows who. And I mean, I think I can probably guess that, before she asked you for permission, I seriously doubt there wasn't some stuff going on anyway. But how was this making you feel? Because I mean, you were already not sure why your intimacy hadn't been going as well as it had earlier. I mean, I can only imagine, like, why. I guess a way of asking you this is, why do you think you let yourself put up with it as long as you did?
Fear, John. I'd started dating her when we were 20. Fear, and just this belief that if I'm just a good enough person, she'll come along. And no matter how good you are, it's not going to change somebody else. And I'm the kind of person that, like, I'll read if I feel like I'm not being a good enough parent, I'm going to read a couple books on how to parent and try a couple new things. And I just assumed that she was like that. And so I was afraid of, like, the embarrassment of, my gosh, I've been with her since I was 20. We were married. Like, I don't want to be a guy that, gives up on his wife, because that's just not who I am. And it wasn't like when the relationship started, it was all exciting, fun, and it took it to a really big high, and then the downward was just kind of slow and steady. There'd be some moments that would drop, but come back up, but it was just a slow decline, and just I could tell over time that I just wasn't respected. And one of the books that I've read about relationships is this idea of love and respect. And I made sure that I showed love, but I didn't get respect back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. How do you think having children played into all of this?
I think it made things get a lot more real. The responsibility of, raising other humans. We can't go out and party all the time if you've got kids. It doesn't matter. Like, they would get brought with us to the breweries or the bars and stuff like that. but you can't really do that. And again, my default was like, well, I'm not drinking. And bluntly, like, I like my kids. I like hanging out with them, and everybody tells me this, like, they're only going to be little for a few years. And that fear of missing out on them was like a huge motivator for me to stop drinking, because I would wake up hungover and be hungover for a day or two. And that happened like when my son was like his first Christmas Eve, I was all hungover for that. And then his second birthday the day after. And I just said, for me, like so without outing my I got great parents, but my family, it's got untreated alcoholism, right? And I just said, I'm not going to be that way. Like, everybody can do their own thing, but I'm not going to be that guy. So that with the kids, my natural role is like, I'm just going to hang out with my kids. I'm going to watch my kids. I'm a little bit more of a homebody than her. So it actually gave me a reason not to have to be out, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just always running around. It for me, it was actually kind of comforting knowing that I could just kind of relax. We had this big, beautiful home that we bought. I always joke, like, it would have been the perfect home to quarantine in, because it had like multiple fireplaces, like a bar area downstairs for relaxing, entertaining. It had a private office. I had a big swing set in the backyard. It was, perfect. And then, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment right before COVID hit, and so it was just for me, it was just all good experience. Like, it was challenging, but I look at it now and I couldn't imagine having to be quarantined in that situation. Not that she actually quarantined, she was going out. The mask mandate or the stay at home didn't slow her down, or maybe slowed her down, but didn't stop, but I just wouldn't have had that pressure to be part of that.
Is she still dating the same guy?
No, she's got a new guy. So the guy that she was dating, again, no disrespect, just facts. He was about 10 years older, had spent time in prison for running some drug houses. And he was a single guy. So, and, apparently really good looking. So I don't, like everybody said, like, he's not going to want to like settle down and be with somebody who's got 2 kids. He's got options, and that his options don't. So he broke up with her, but immediately after, she had this new guy, whom, again, I think that monkey branch thing again, right? And if we got time for a quick story, I can tell you about this, how I met him or heard about him. I've never really met him, but so the first guy, the kids, and this was like one of the hardest. This is one of the challenging times that I had. I was in, laying down with my 2 kids, at the time 4-year-old and 3-year-old, and my daughter goes, the guy, we'll call him Mo, Daddy, Mo sleeps in Mom's bed. I'm like, really? Okay. How do you know that? Well, I saw him in there, and he was naked. And then my son goes, yeah, I knew it was him because I went downstairs in the garage and I saw that it was his car. So that happened in like June. And then August, July and August, my kids were talking about how Mo is just so mean. He's so mean to Mom. Mom doesn't hang out with him anymore because he's mean to her. Well, in August, it was, one of their friends' mom was sleeping in Mom's bed now. Followed by about a month later, September, a year ago, probably today, pretty close to today, the 23rd, I still remember. I pick up my kids from daycare and I said, hey guys, how was your weekend? And they said, it was good. We were at so-and-so's cabin and we slept in the camper. And my son goes, yeah, Dad, I slept in the bottom bunk and Mom and Kurt slept in the top bunk. Who is this guy? And basically this guy has been living at the house, so almost a year now. And I've asked her, does he live there? And she won't respond. I asked her one time recently because my kids are very confused. They think that he lives in a camper, but just sleeps at mom's house all the time because he doesn't have a house. So, and this guy is 20 years older and has, I guess, a grandkid or two. We're in our early 30s and he's in his 50s. But so it's just been, I feel for my kids. It's kind of a lot of change, but that was how I heard about the newest guy.
This kind of story really ticks me off. I just don't understand why people introduce children to their new, boyfriend or girlfriend so soon after divorce. It just, I don't think people quite understand the damage they're doing to their kids. Clearly your ex-wife is selfish and doesn't really care, but it really can have all kinds of impacts on people. Your kids seeing some guy nude in their house with their mother. That is just, I don't know how you kept it together. I would have lost my mind.
Well, I'll tell you what I did, John, and I'm not super proud of it, but I didn't know what to do. And I did something that I think is a mistake. So I'm going to share it especially for the other guys. Because I'm not going to pretend that I've been a saint through this the whole time, right? So I didn't know what to do. So we had a joint email still from the same time, and I sent an email and BCC'd her mom, her aunt, maybe her sister, like a handful of people that were close to her that just said, "I'm at wit's end. I don't know what to do." During our divorce conversation, she said she wasn't going to bring this guy around. And now my 4-year-old has seen him, naked. Let me just see if I got the phone. I might want to just read this. I'm going to read this word for word just because it's, me owning up to something that I did that I'm not super proud of. And I've got it right here because I see that she recently forwarded it to herself. Let me see this. Oh, I included my mom on it too. So I said, the subject was what my 4-year-old saw. And I wrote, "You're getting this email because I've had enough and it's time to let people know what's really going on. In January, my ex-wife left me for a convicted felon who spent time in prison on drug charges because he's got big arms and makes good money. 4 days after promising not to introduce this thug to our scared and confused kids, she invited this guy over to my house to drop off some things," in quotations. "Last night, as I was putting the kids to bed, my 2-year-old says to me, 'So-and-so sleeps in mom's bed.' My 4-year-old chimes in saying, 'Yeah, Dad, he was naked in mom's bed. I snuck into her room the other night and he was there. He didn't see me though. I wasn't sure what guy he was, so I went down to the garage and looked inside and saw his white car. That's how I knew it was so-and-so.' Not the kind of conversation I should be having with my toddler when my ex-wife claims she's putting the kids first and we're legally still married. I didn't want to spread this stuff around, but I'm at wit's end. She insists she's putting the needs of our kids first, but then I hear stuff like this, unprompted by my 2 and 4-year-old. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them from harm. Talking to so-and-so, my ex-wife, isn't getting it done. Now I ask that you talk to her and tell her to put them first." That was my response, John. And, should have I done that? Probably not. I don't necessarily need to be airing it all out, but I didn't know what to do. And I was extremely upset.
So what happened when you sent that email?
Well, it was from a joint email account that we had shared, and she forwarded it to her attorney, and he responded, drunk. He was like asking her if I was drunk, not good. And I wrote, "No, Bill, I'm sober, unlike your client. Fearful for the safety of my young children." So her mom called me and just said, "Hey, keep my sister out of this, like what's going on here. And, I understand why she defended her daughter's actions because it's her daughter, but what I learned was like, not a whole lot came out of it. Some awareness happened. So somebody might've talked to her, but ultimately, sure, I vented, but I think I just upset more people and brought them into something that maybe they didn't want to be part of. But I didn't know what to do. And I still don't necessarily know what to do. I found that the more people that know what's going on, the more she acts differently, but I don't know what I really should have done. But that's what I did,
Well, I mean, I don't think that was all that bad, to be perfectly honest with you, Paul. I've seen a lot worse. But one thing that you said earlier that I would like to harpen back to, because I say it all the time, is you just have to always remember to control what you can control. You can't control her behavior. You can control how you are around your kids, how you introduce your kids to other people, but you can't control her. And when it's actually rises to the level of abuse, that's about the only time that a court or somebody else is going to get involved, unfortunately. But I think kind of as a sort of as a little hint of something that you really should think about doing when you're negotiating a settlement, and something that she promised to you, but as we all know, promises mean nothing unless they're in writing. I mean, you can negotiate in your settlement agreement that you're not going to introduce your children to anyone else for a period of time. You can also say that before you introduce somebody, the two of you are going to discuss it. I've even seen agreements that say the two parents are going to jointly tell the children. There's all kinds of things out there that you can do. And I think the story that you're telling should scare the living crap out of a lot of fathers, because this is exactly what happens.
Yeah.
And right now we're talking about introducing, the children to somebody, but it could be anything. You cannot trust a single word your wife, soon to be ex-wife, says to you. It has to be in writing and it has to be clear. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. In fact, when I first presented, our whatever you call it, the first draft of the decree, we had language like that. And one of the things that was told to me is like, it's very hard to enforce that, And so what I know about my ex-wife is if there's no repercussion, either a legal repercussion, or if she's not going to get embarrassed by other people, she's going to do whatever the heck she wants. And so that was why I was like, all right, do I sit there and go after like all these like little things that I'd like to see in there, knowing that if it's not enforced, it's not going to happen? And the reason I had a little bit of insight, not only because I was married to her and was in a relationship with her, but I watched her brother. She did almost the exact same thing that her brother did. She was like 3-4 years behind her brother, who has got these decrees and he's not supposed to do this or not supposed to do that, but there's just no enforcement on him. And so that was why I said, okay, if I want to get this done, I'm going to make it just, here's the money that's getting split, here's the time that's getting split. These are the things that they can actually enforce, but it's something that we discussed, if that makes sense. So I would be curious from your perspective, like, what are things that people can enforce? I know every state's different, but generally, like, I'm through it, so it's too late for me, but for the next guy who's going through this, tell me more about what you've done, what you've seen, and what you've seen work.
Well, what's interesting is there is a perception out there that orders are just pieces of paper that are never enforced. And I get that. And I won't say there isn't some truth to that. I've seen judges give people far too many chances before they're actually punished. And punishment is usually monetary. It's very rarely anything real, like taking time away from a parent. Usually it's making someone pay, attorney's fees or some minimal sanction. But, in situations like this, it's more of an incremental thing. I mean, and I'm listening to you talk about your ex-wife, and it's the kind of thing where if she was doing that, if she was violating that agreement in combination with, maybe at some point in the future, there's some kind of issue with alcohol, and sort of things start piecing together. That's sort of where you can get to a point where, yes, maybe there would be no consequences for violating one thing, but you might be able to piece things together to make a case, particularly when your children get a little bit older and maybe they don't want to be around mom and her boyfriend that's treating her like crap, that's 20 years older than her, and they would rather be with you more. That's when all this history might be important. And again, you're right to believe that, and a lot of men believe this, that there really is no consequence. And by the way, I'll say this generally with everybody, men and women, everyone's got the same perception. Because I'll talk bad about guys for a second.
Yeah.
20 years ago, whenever I first became a lawyer and I worked for a judge, I would see guys come in who had not paid child support and would owe $100,000, $200,000. And they would be the exact kinds of people that are virtually impossible to collect from. People that are self-employed, people who are doctors, lawyers. Well, not so much lawyers, because lawyers can be punished in other ways, but architects, engineers, people that have plenty of money who just don't pay. And the way the system is set up, you might get thrown in jail for a night, you pay a little bit of money, you get out. So the system is just not set up to truly punish people. But that's why going into, and we're going to talk about the divorce process. We haven't even talked about it yet. But when you get to the divorce process, that's why how you approach it and some of the things you do are so important, because, again, it's a piece of paper. It's like a restraining order. A restraining order is a piece of paper. It doesn't actually prevent someone from going back and beating somebody up. It doesn't prevent it. I mean, they're orders. We hope and pray that people are going to follow what orders say. But yes, you should not, Paul, and everyone listening, you should not shy away from getting something in an agreement that you really want just because you're told that maybe it's going to be hard to enforce. Because guess what? There's judges out there that do enforce things.
Sure.
I've actually seen judges transfer custody to one parent because of violations. So anyway, there's a bunch of things out there, but let's get to your divorce process itself. I know you talked about a mediator. So how did you and your ex-wife talk about approaching divorce, and what were the first steps that were taken when you started the process?
Sure. I'm going to walk through my process, and you might roll your eyes or say, like, what did you do? Right. I definitely took a different approach than some of the people that I've gotten to know. When it was, when it was decided, like, hey, we're done, I started reaching out to attorneys, and I just said, look, we agree that we're done. We're not going to fight about a bunch of stuff. I know that it comes down to money and time with the kids. This was my perspective, right? And I didn't want to spend a ton of money on the divorce. And hindsight, I think I would have approached a little bit differently because, we were very amicable at the time. And so I was like, all right, well, we both agree on like 99% of this. We'll just get it written up. We'll get it to a judge and go. So I contacted some attorneys and just said, hey, I've got her. She, we're both on the same page. And so I met with the attorney. It was technically my attorney. And then I brought her in, and we basically like went through like the money and the time. And thankfully we don't have any debt. We had a mortgage, but other than that, we didn't have any of that. And so like the assets were pretty straightforward to divide up. We agreed 50-50 on time. And so we literally met with the attorney together, wrote it all up, and then she was going to get her own attorney to like review it and sign off on it so we could turn it into the judge. And a couple of those things came up, like how much time before we would introduce to a significant other. And that was like the 4 days later after we kind of like figured that side of it, is when this guy showed up, and I was super upset. I said, you already said you were going to do this, or you weren't going to do this, and then you did it 4 days later. Like, how can I trust anything that you're going to say? So I went back to my attorney and I said, screw this. Like, I wasn't asking for any child support, even though she made like 50% more than I did. And so I said, I'm going to ask for child support. I'm going to ask for like full custody of the kids. Like, I'm just going to come at this very adversarial, when initially I had gone and said, hey, we're very amicable. Well, as you know, like, that wasted time and money. And even with the attorney that was like, yeah, let's do this amicable, now for me to flip it and say, go the other way, I should have probably just gotten a different attorney. But we kind of got through that. Like, we went back and forth, and I basically came to the agreement that we initially had done. And then they submitted it to a judge, and he came back, and he had a couple things that we had to modify, but then he sent it through. Where the mediator comes in, this is really silly, and this was just a waste of time and money. We were divorced, John, and we had been divorced for 6 months. I got a letter in the mail from an attorney. She had gotten a new attorney, and she claimed that because I had made that, call to CPS about the spanking, and there was one other credible thing that happened that I had to get CPS involved with, that involved her new boyfriend. She said that they claimed that I was putting the kids in harm's way by making them have to talk to these professionals. And then she was upset because I wouldn't do a schedule swap for her, even though I had previously agreed to, but then I wasn't able to. And then the last thing that they wanted to talk to me about was, in the decree, it said that my address would be the permanent address for their signing up for school and for their legal things. And I had moved into a house and signed the kids up for school based on my address. And they claimed that I had made these educational decisions without talking to them. And then I ignored the letter, and they just kept escalating it until I went to mediation. That, they were threatening me with court fees and attorney's fees. And then I went to a mediation, John, for 4 hours, and nothing was accomplished.
So what came of all of that? Did they end up going to court?
No, nothing has happened since the mediation. My kids are going to school based on my address, and nothing happened.
So they were just trying to rattle you, it looks like.
Exactly.
Not gonna lie, I've done that once or twice myself, Paul.
I believe it. Okay.
No, I mean, listen. What's you guys started off this process, I think, fine. I've certainly seen that done many times, where people can go through everything, and I can already tell that you don't like to rock the boat too much.
Yep.
And that's how a lot of men are. And I get it. You want to get through the process as quickly as possible, spend as little money as you can for it to still be a good product, because you want an agreement that's clear, concise, actually says what you think it says, all of that good stuff. But, there's certain things out there, like your comments on child support. I've heard similar comments from so many men. And the first thing I think about, because again, I've been dealing with divorce for 20 years, is I have never, not once, ever heard a mother or a woman ever say, well, I know my husband makes more than me, but I'm not going to ask him for child support. Not once have I ever heard that. But I've heard many, many men do it. And it's one of those things where I know it's a cultural issue that we have. But I just want you and everyone else listening to just remember something, that the purpose of child support isn't to take money from somebody. The whole purpose is to make sure your children have a similar experience in both houses. And that's the point of child support. And I think people will kind of lose sight of that. And, you're dealing with your ex-wife who, I mean, talk about no consequences. She made a lot more than you. She got the 50-50 custody, and she's able to go out and have all this fun. She's bringing these guys in and out of the house. She's got no consequences anywhere. And, it's one of those things where, and I know everyone thinks about what they went through in their divorce, and did I do this right? And did I do that right? And should I have done it this way? Which is not helpful at all. But one of the reasons why you are speaking out is to help show guys what you went through, and maybe put some ideas in their heads as they're going through the process about what they should or shouldn't do.
That's it.
So I guess my question for you, Paul, after that very long buildup is, if you had it to do over again, what isn't in your divorce agreement that you would make sure got put in?
Yeah. So I've thought about this, right? And so some of the things, like, I would have liked some of those, at least baseline rules about how we're going to raise the kids around other people. And to your point, hearing that, sure, it might not be enforced on that specific thing, but it can help paint the picture of, hey, this is somebody that doesn't follow their agreements, right? That would be something. A little bit more clarity as to, like, pickup times and exchanges. We had a kind of a back and forth that, went way too long about, well, what was the time that parenting time started? Is it at 8 o'clock when we drop the kids off at daycare, or is it at 5 o'clock when we pick up the kids at daycare? And there was confusion about that. Getting a little bit more of an understanding of, like, school holidays. That's not really, because our kids were so young, we didn't really have a lot of foresight as to how much school schedule would affect just the kids' schedule. If I were to think about, like, what else, I think getting some clarity as to, like, better clarity as to communicating with the kids. So right now, like, part of our decree says that, we're supposed to let our kids talk to each other unencumbered between the hours of 8 and 8. And if we make a phone call, they're supposed to return it, and vice versa. And for example, on Saturday, I tried calling my kids in the morning, no response. I tried calling them at about 7:30. And then the next morning at 7:30 in the morning, she called me with the kids. So just getting more clarity as to, like, what we can do on that. For a while, she would, like, get in an argument with me that I had to, like, FaceTime her. And I was like, I don't want to FaceTime you, So I think communication with the kids, just really thinking through what that looks like, scheduling what that looks like, who drops off, who picks up, what times. Because again, to your point, this piece of paper is like the new rule book that you've got to, it's the boundaries. And again, for someone like me who wasn't always good at setting boundaries, having third-party objective, like, nope, it's in writing, that would have made my life a little bit easier. I still don't, like, maybe for a year or two, it would have been nice to have some child support, but at the end of the day, I believe that my earning power is much greater, just based on now that I do have some freedom. Like, I think this year I'll probably out earn her. And so I'm just grateful that not every 2 years is she going to be coming back and looking at my thing. So for me personally, I'm glad I did that, because I was young enough in my career, and the career trajectory is pretty good. And I know that is just, for me, I just want to separate as much as possible. So the kind of that balance of untangling my life with hers as much as possible while maintaining access to my kids is really important.
I think that's very, very well reasoned explanation for why you did what you did. And I will say all the other things that you were talking about are so important. And it's actually why it's very important that you find, well, first of all, you find an attorney or a mediator who has been doing this a while.
Yep.
Because a good attorney or mediator will be able to not just take what you and your spouse want to agree to, but to tell you all of the other 50 things that you should think about and the other things that maybe you should put in your agreement. I mean, what are some of the things we know about kids? Number one, at some point, they're going to want to learn to drive and have a car, right? We also know that most kids are going to do something after high school, vocational school, community college. And I granted, in not every state, you don't have to, parents aren't on the hook for college, but still, particularly, it sounds like we haven't talked about your education, your wife's education, but it sounds like you guys are college educated.
Yep.
And, so I'm sure you're going to want that for your kids. But these are all things that why leave arguments up to the future? You know these things are going to happen. You're in a position where you and your spouse are having to agree to so many things. It's not a big stretch to add one more thing. And by the way, you don't have to agree. Like you were going through some of the details. You don't always have to agree in black and white what's going to happen in the future, but you can at least agree, here's the process we're going to use. For example, I'll use college as an example. We're going to meet in our child's junior year of high school to discuss, where they're going to go. Are we going to help them pay for it? Blah, 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 blah. And then you can agree to stuff like that. It's controlling what you can control, not just yourself, but into the future. Because do you want to, I love what you just said a minute ago. You want to disconnect as much as possible. Do you want to keep having fights? There are people, Paul, that I have divorced that I have dealt with every single year for a decade. There's a guy right now who got divorced in 2012. My firm has never sent him what's called a closing letter, basically just saying we're done.
Sure.
We've never sent one because the case never ended. It's 2021, almost a decade consistently. And you can only imagine how much he's been paying. You've got to there has to be an end. And what's happening, and I think I'll just kind of summarize the point you made, is if you don't put a lot of details that are foreseeable, like pick up and drop off, that is probably the number one thing people fight about more than anything else. If you don't put those things in there, your divorce isn't over. You may just not realize it yet. It's not over. You're going to constantly be going back and forth. All right. So I think that was a great explanation of the process. And I don't think what you did was a bad thing. I see it happen all the time. And, your call to CPS, you know what? You do what's best for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
My whole philosophy with everyone that I talk to is it's always better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. So if you feel like your kids are in danger, you shouldn't care about what your lawyer is going to say or what a judge is going to say. You do what you need to do for your kids. And that includes, by the way, if one of your kids calls you and they're worried or scared or whatever. My daughter's only a little bit older than your kids. I'm in the car. I'm going to pick her up and I'll deal with the consequences later on. And I know this is not the lawyer in me saying this is the father. You do what you need to do for your kids. So, I don't want anyone listening to ever think, listen, this wasn't, I heard that Paul, he called CPS and, really maybe he shouldn't have done it. You did what you need to do. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that, quite frankly, you need to make sure that you feel comfortable with what's going on. What were you gonna say, Paul? I'm sorry.
I'll say agree. I have zero regrets. I mean, the first time was because my daughter literally had bruises on her back and her butt, and her mother admitted to spanking and then denied it and hung up the phone on me. The second time, this was a week after I learned about the newest guy. The facts that I had were new guy slept over at the house. My daughter slept in her bed, in mom's bed. And when I went to pick up daughter, she'd been crying and upset all day, and daycare provider didn't know what was going on with her. When I called mom and said, "Who's this new guy?" she said, "It's none of your business," and hung up the phone on me. What's the next call you make? You call the sheriff. Like, you don't have a choice. That's your responsibility as a dad, you know? So, yeah. And it was the sheriff that was like, we got to get, this is the information you have. Like, we need to get somebody else involved.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do what's best for your kids always.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, we've been talking about your divorce. I'm very curious myself how you're doing now. Have you found somebody?
Yes. So I'm doing totally different than I was 2 years ago. And so through this process, I met a woman who was a divorced mother with 2 kids, and similar experience with the ex, very selfish, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've been dating for about a year now, and we waited about, 10 months before ever introducing each other to our kids. We've been together for a while. And bluntly, like, I am in probably the best position I've ever been. My relationship with my kids are great. Got a really good relationship with this woman. This year, financially, like I said, things are looking, grateful, really good. I'm in a house, like, in a really cool neighborhood. I can walk my kids to school. The other, 2 blocks the other way is like an ice cream store, really cool downtown. I've got a really good friend group of guys. So one thing that I didn't really talk about, which was the catalyst of this group, is I was doing a divorce class, and I've continued to see these guys on a monthly basis, and we all come together, share a meal together, and talk about what's going on in life. And I was the first one that got the paperwork signed for the divorce, and then there was 2 other guys that one was right after me, and one was a couple months later. And then we've got another guy who's just kind of starting the process. But one guy's got older kids, one guy's got kids my age. And so we all bring a different perspective to the table. And we sit down, we share a meal, talk about how each other are doing, and talk through current issues. And really that friendship, that fellowship has been really good. And through this Instagram account, I've started to talk to other guys on more of an individual basis about, hey, here's what's going on. And it's not always about just the bad things. It's like, tell me about something really good that's going on with your kids. So I feel very, very grateful for what it's like. And it's funny, like I said, well, you asked, well, why didn't you leave earlier? And it was because I was afraid, John. I was afraid. But it's like, what was I afraid of? I don't know. I was afraid because life is better now than it was when I was married.
And that's so important to hear. And I hear that from just about every man I talk to. And you live in a place where you had access to a group of men that you could actually see in person and build this fellowship with. There's a lot of guys all across the country who live in places where there aren't those sorts of places for them to go. And those are the guys that feel so isolated and really difficult. And that was really the genesis of what I started, was to provide a virtual format for people to get together. It's the same thing, just it's a different format, but it's so important. It's so important. And I always like to say, women talk about all this with their friends. They do. They go, they chat, they're fine. Us men, we all have a lot more of a difficult time talking to our close male friends about what's going on in our personal life. But when we're around other guys that are going through the same thing, most guys can open up and actually talk about what's going on. So I think whether it's being anonymous and giving your advice to other guys out there so they can see, listen, I went through this marriage. It didn't go the way we wanted it to go. I have some great kids. I found myself. I got myself better, and now my life's better than it's ever been. Or your face is out there and you can actually tell people the same thing and they can put a face and a name together. However, we're going to get the information out there. It's important that guys see this. And I can tell you that everybody in our group is going to love hearing everything you said today. I think it's going to provide a lot of inspiration. And I really hope that everybody goes and checks out your Instagram account. Again, it's the Divorced Dads Anonymous Instagram account. And if you've been through a divorce, he does have a link there where you can fill out a form and share your insight and your story. And I think Paul's got some plans to really put something together of all kinds of advice for dads out there who are going through a divorce. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. It was an absolute pleasure to hear everything. I mean, obviously, these kinds of stories we could talk about for hours on end. We're just trying to get it out there. And I think that people are going to learn a lot from what you had to say today.
Appreciate it. I really appreciate, the community that you put together, how open you've been, and just your perspective as well. So thank you so much for having me on. I hope that this can help just at least one other guy going through this. Maybe spark an idea or, ask that tough question of their attorney. Hey, but what else should I be putting in here? So thank you so much and have a good one.
Thank you so much.